Sacramento. How long is this going to take? An hour? An hour? Why? Don't you have more important questions and less important questions? Gov. Jerry Brown of California was settling into a chair in the first-floor parlor of the governor's mansion. I had requested this interview months ago, for a story on Mr. Brown's final years as governor and his reflections on the end presumably of a 45-year career in public life. His out-of-the-gate impatience was not a surprise, or particularly daunting. I have interviewed Mr. Brown many times over the years, in a radio station headquarters in New Hampshire when he was running for president in 1992, over wine at a restaurant here when writing a profile of him for the New York Times Magazine, in his state capitol office, filled with historical reminders of the time his father served as governor, and in a hotel suite in San Jose. I think it was San Jose, with Maureen Dowd, the Times columnist, over sandwiches before he gave a speech. There are a few things to know about the Democratic governor of California should you ever get a chance to interview him. He gets bored easily and is not given to introspection. He has little patience for questions that he considers obvious or conventional. And by the way, it's not a good idea to use the word legacy in asking about Mr. Brown's, legacy. See the advice about obvious and conventional questions. Mr. Brown, 79, has been at this for a very long time. He understands the news business better than most journalists I know. He can anticipate the next query and the subtext of any question. In other words, do not try to trap him. When I asked Mr. Brown if he was confident he was leaving the state in good hands, he arched an eyebrow. "Well, that's a loaded question," he said. "What if I say I am not confident? That's one damn headline. So I have to say I'm confident." It's fair to say that was a vote of not so confident in his potential successor. Mr. Brown's years in public life mean he can be a challenging interview. He almost certainly knows the subject better than you do. I spent a lot of time preparing questions and talking to editors about what we wanted to learn before walking into the mansion. How much, for example, should we ask him about his legislative plans for his final year, his views on national politics, his future plans and his legacy? Darn, and he can be prickly. Every lame duck politician has to deal with losing power as attention turns to the next generation. Mr. Brown has managed to hold on to his clout longer than most. Still, he bristled at the admittedly conventional suggestion that his power was now ebbing. "Give me an example where my power—" "I don't think you can," he said. "I've done a lot of these things. Now it's implementation. I'm certainly being sought by the congressional people. They don't see my power diminishing." Mr. Brown may have expressed concern about a lengthy sit-down, but these things take time. It might be a while before Mr. Brown finally answers a question that you know he wants to answer. As we began, Mr. Brown harumphed at questions about the potential impact of federal tax reform on California. How could he possibly know until he had a chance to really study it? Before long, we returned to the subject, and Mr. Brown offered a vivid excoriation of the new law, the blah blah detail, as he put it. Be damned. Throughout our time, Mr. Brown was as fidgety as a teenager with an iPhone, making side remarks to aides, keeping an eye on his dog, Calusa, in the next chair. His eyes darted away as his smartphone buzzed with a call. "Who is Doug Ducey?" he asked, glancing at the caller ID. "The state of Arizona." "That's the governor of the state of Arizona." "Should I take a call from the governor of Arizona?" His press secretary, Evan Westrup, suggested that he wait. I saved the question about his you-know-what until we were almost done. I don't think people remember governors that much, Mr. Brown responded. Do you remember Pete Wilson? The interview stretched to more than 70 minutes. It would have gone on longer had Mr. Westrup not called time. For all of Mr. Brown's protestations about a long interview as we sat down, it was pretty clear by the end that the soon-to-retire governor of California would have been delighted to keep talking into the night.